We are at an amazing time in public health right now in terms of how we're looking at children. And I'm hoping that we all come together to figure out how to support children in a way that will affect them now and our entire population far, far into adulthood. If you go back 100 years, people had 5 or 6 kids. Why? Because most of them died, and most of them died from germs. And then we conquered the germs, right? We figured out between antibiotics and between how to boil water and to pasteurize milk and how to immunize kids, we learned how to make kids survive. Then what we focused on was we focused on the psychosocial morbidities, those behaviors that were more likely to affect kids' health. And then what we did is we tried to figure out which kids were more likely to have negative behaviors. In other words, kids fall off a cliff, where should I build the fence and for whom should I build the fence? That made us do large studies to figure out which kids were broken. The answers were not surprising. The answers is you were more likely to break if you were a victim of economic, social, or racial injustice. You were more likely to break if you had an absent father. You were more likely to break if your mother had psychiatric illness. So we knew where to build the fence, but we set ourselves up for racism and for classism in public policy. Where we're at right now is we're saying, let's not let kids get to the fence. Let's figure out how to move them back from the fence. So we're looking at the social determinants that affect health. And what that means is it's not about race, it's about racism. It's not about poverty, it is about unequal distribution of resources. And what it is, more than anything else, is that it's about trauma. We now understand what adverse childhood experiences do to kids. There was an amazing study led by Filidi and Anda in 1998, and we're just beginning now to really move forward with our knowledge of what this means. Here's what they did. They looked at thousands of mostly middle-class people in California. And they were looking at 50, 60, 70-year-olds. And they asked them all the regular questions that studies ask, like what's happened to your health? What's happened in your life? Tell us a little bit about who you are, your race, your gender, your age. But they did something different. They said, tell us about what happened to you when you were a child. And they looked at whether you were abused, whether you witnessed violence, whether your parent used drugs. And here's what we learned. We learned that if you were abused, you were more likely to get divorced during your adulthood. Not a surprise. If you were abused, you were more likely to do drugs during adulthood. I don't think that's a surprise either. We learned that you were more likely to get viral hepatitis. Not a big surprise if you understand how you get it. You were more likely to be obese. You were more likely to get diabetes. You were more likely to get heart disease. You were more likely to get strokes. You were more likely to get certain kinds of cancers. You were more likely to get autoimmune diseases. You were more likely to get osteoporosis. You were more likely to get brittle bones as an elderly woman if you were neglected or abused as a child. That is shocking, but not surprising if you understand the body. And there's this magical unless that I need you to hear, because this would be terrible news. But the unless is unless you had a loving, responsible adult who stood beside you through the most difficult times. And if you did, you ended up looking very much like everybody else. Which means, folks, that we are at a pivotal moment in public health. It means that what we do is we work hard to eliminate any sorts of child maltreatment or neglect. We raise kids up. But we also raise parents to learn how to be loving and responsible and supportive. And we prepare communities how to support kids through difficult times because we believe it's going to make a difference. What do we know happens to kids? Not all kids. Many kids come through trauma just fine. But what happens to kids? What happens is their brain is more likely to become the amygdala, which is the frog brain, the reactive brain, is on fire. The cerebral cortex, which is the thinking part of the brain that kind of slows down the emotions or processes the emotions, is hurt. The hippocampus, which is the part of the brain that helps you integrate thoughts, feelings, and facts, is damaged. So what does it mean kids are like when they've been traumatized? Not all kids, but they're more likely to be hyper vigilant, to never know when something bad is going to happen. As a result, they don't necessarily trust us, and they've earned the right to not trust us. What else does it make you? It makes you reactive. It makes you more likely to be volatile, to snap in a second. Why? Because you had to. What else? It makes you more likely to be dissociative, to zone out. Why? If you speak to someone who's been abused, they can remember what their ceiling looked like. They can remember the crack on the ceiling, how many dots were on the tiles, but they don't remember their childhood. Thank God, because it's protective for them to have lost those memories. And then they needed to fill up those spaces, those absent moments, with a story. So they might be more likely to confabulate, to make up stories that might not make sense to the rest of us. They might be more likely to lie. Why? Because if your daddy comes home and he opens up the refrigerator and wants a hot dog and he says, hey, who took the last hot dog? And you said, me, daddy, and then you get thrown against the wall, you learn to say, I don't know, we're the big hairy monster. So people who have been through trauma might be more likely to be reactive. They might be more likely to lie. They might be more likely to confabulate, to make things up, to zone out, to not be aware of things, to not trust people, which means that sometimes it's really hard to work with people who have been through trauma. Because, you know, I'm worthy of trust. I'm a sweet guy. How can you be reactive to me? We know what it's not about you. And core to being able to love people under any condition is to know what's about you and what's not about you. Core to being able to love is to be able to look at a human being with a different frame, a different lens. So that rather than looking at them with what's wrong with you, you look at them with what happened to you. Now, that doesn't mean you should say that to a kid, because it'll trigger them. But when you can calm yourself amidst any behavior by knowing something happened to the kid, it enables us to love. Another big thing we have to do is learn how to hold people's pain without owning their pain. We can't conquer their past, but we can make it safe to feel again. We can hold their pain. And when we do this, we learn appropriate boundaries, we learn how to protect kids, we learn how to move kids forward. You know, I talked about what kids are like who are traumatized, and some of it doesn't sound so positive. But you know, I'm blessed to be able to work with these kids. And let me tell you something. I don't want trauma to be just another label, just another thing that is wrong with you. What I will tell you is that the kids I work with, yeah, they may be traumatized, but by and large, they're the most sensitized human beings you're ever going to meet. These are the kids who want to repair the world. These are the kids who are frustrated by the what is and begin to think about the possibility of what ifs. If we can capture these kids at this pivotal moment in their lives and really support them in a loving and nurturing way, these are the kids who want to be our future social workers, our doctors, our nurses, our police officers. That's who our DHS workers. This is who all of my kids want to be because they've seen injustice, they've seen wrong, and they want to correct it. It's a magical moment in time. If we can harness their sensitivity and make them know that trauma is awful, but it also creates growth. You know, resilience is not about invulnerability. Resilience is about being able to bounce. When we're looking at what successful kids should be, we want to raise a generation of kids who are compassionate, who are loving, who are generous of spirit, who are empathetic. These kids that I'm talking about who have been through so much, who have been through so much heart, they have this by the gallonful when we can draw it out and make it safe again for them to feel.